Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to have Professor Amaka with us today, and I will introduce her. She is Professor Amaka is a leading expert in pediatric radiology, distinguished by her groundbreaking research and commitment to advanced radiology, championing diversity, and using cutting-edge research to improve patient care. In her current role, she serves as Chair of Pediatric Musculoskeletal Imaging at the University of Sheffield and Honorary Consultant Pediatric Radiologist at Sheffield Children's NHS Foundation. Her research spans critical areas, including suspected child abuse, skeletal dysplasias, and AI-powered diagnostic tools, with the primary goal of enhancing imaging accuracy and protecting vulnerable children. Her work shaped policies and fostered collaborations across radiology and healthcare. Among others, Professor Amaka is the first ethnic minority and female managing director of pediatric radiology out of America. She serves as chair of the European Society of Pediatric Radiology Child Abuse Task Force. She is also the convener of the Skeletal Dysplasia Group for Teaching and Research. Additionally, she is the director for Wellbeing and EDI, Faculty of Health, University of Sheffield. She is also a patron of RadReach and BAM Medic Society, a recipient of BIR Bear Make It Better and BMJ Awards. She's also an expert witness for His Majesty's Courts. I think it is a great honor to have Professor Amaka to give us this master on scientific writing and publishing. The floor is yours, Professor Amaka.
Thank you, Amal. Thank you very much. And Amal is one of my section editors for the journal Pediatric Radiology. And that really is my disclosure to say that I'm the managing editor outside the Americas. And it has to be said, number one, because I get a small remuneration for the task. And number two, because a lot of the experts, I'm going to take out sections from reviews that I have given over the past 3 years or so that I've been managing editor, to show you examples of what is not good journal writing and what are the reasons behind us rejecting papers, in the hope that it will help you to increase your acceptance rate to international journals. I think many of you will have been authors or co-authors in local or regional journals, but our goal is really to have us all across the world equitably publishing and having our papers accepted across the world. So I'm going to start actually with the top 10 mistakes to avoid generally in research. And if some of you have heard this talk before, I apologize, but I was going to change it, but there was really nothing that I thought that needed to change. I've added a few things rather than taking things out. And so just starting with the top 10 mistakes to avoid in research before you've even started to write your paper. And I divided them into 2 groups of 5. Setup. First of all, if you're an early researcher, it is far better to choose a good team than a good topic. Because as an early researcher, you're trying to learn the skills and the team will teach you that. Ultimately, you can go off and find a topic that's more suited to you. You know, you might prefer neuroradiology, you might prefer oncology, you might prefer pediatrics, but initially you're trying to learn transferable skills. So choose a supervisor that will actually guide you, choose somebody that will mentor you, choose somebody that is there to help you achieve. They will achieve through your achievement. But if you find somebody who is wanting you just to help them achieve, that is a problem. So it doesn't matter how perfectly the topic suits you. If the person is not behind you for your own success, avoid them. And how will you find out? You can look to previous PhD students, previous co-authors, ask people, that sort of thing. Have a look to see who are the first authors or the second authors in that person's publications. Sometimes you'll see that actually it's only the 2 or 3 senior people that are named. Well, who's doing all the work? So that's the sort of thing you should be thinking about. Skimming over the basics is a mistake, and by that I mean make sure you have a foundation in you understand what does prospective mean, what does retrospective mean. You understand simple basic statistics, and that you know how to review critically a paper. You understand what the difference is between a case report and original research. Have some basic understandings. Once you're with the team, either you present them with a question or they give you a question. In either situation, you want to research before you start. Make sure it's not being answered. Make sure it's not too ambitious. So you know, if the question has 10 subparts to it, then that's too ambitious. Take one of those subparts and look to it. Many questions will already have been answered, but maybe not in the specific way you've asked it, or maybe it's just always been done by one particular team in the United Kingdom, and you want to see if Offiah's papers and work in the United Kingdom are relevant to somebody in Tanzania or somebody in Zambia, for example. And that's fine, because you're changing the demographics, and you want to see if that paper, that work can be validated in a different place. So that's, the question may be exactly the same, but the patient population is different. And as long as you explain that, and as long as there's a reason why the patient population may change the answer to the question, then that's fine. Everything in life, all of us know, anything that we decide is always harder, is always more expensive, always needs more people. So if anything, exaggerate the duration, exaggerate the cost. And if you're going for a grant, I have sat on many MRC, NIHR grant panels, and in fact, you're also just as likely to get your project rejected because it's been undercosted. If somebody's going to give you £200,000, they want to make sure that you can actually do what you've said you're going to do, because otherwise they're wasting their £200,000. They will rather give you £1 million and know that you're going to finish with that million than to give you 200,000, although in your mind are much more likely to get 200,000. No, it's not true. Of course, if the project can be done for 200,000 and you're asking for $1 million, it will get rejected. In summary, cost it realistically, and don't try and make it cheaper just because you think you're going to get the grant that way. And don't start at all before you've got all of your approvals. It can be really difficult afterwards. If you've already started, it can actually be unethical, and you may be asked to completely stop. It's much better to get everything in place right at the beginning. And sometimes it's a nuisance, but actually, especially ethics, they will help you sometimes to make your protocol stronger. See it as a learning experience, see it as a positive experience, not as if they're trying to hinder you. They're trying to help. And the project is very often improved by virtue of going through these approval processes. Once you've started and you're conducting your research project, don't compromise, don't cut corners. Do everything as it was written in the protocol, and don't do this thing that people sometimes do where they say, I'm really having difficulty recruiting the children from 5 to 10, which was what my protocol was. I'm just going to make it 11. I'm really having difficulty 6 months down the line of recruiting children 11. Let me make it 13. And by the time your 3-year project is over, what was meant to be 5 to 10-year-olds has become 5 to 17-year-olds. No, don't do that. It becomes a totally, and there was a reason why at the very beginning you set it up for that age group. So be really careful. Careless handling of data, documentation and storage. My advice is to always document data to the smallest unit. Okay, so if you're looking at a fracture and you say displaced fracture, don't just say yes or no. Say something like by 1/3, by 2/3, by grossly displaced. Break it down as far as you can, because when you're going through 1,000 images and you're recording that, it's so much easier than when you're trying to publish your paper and they say, yes, but how badly was it displaced? You can't go back. Even if you don't document it in the original write-up, if one reviewer says, I actually want to know the degree of displacement between groups A and B, you have that data recorded. You're not going to, it's really disheartening to have to go back and review 1,000 images. Everything, I would record it to its lowest possible, the lowest denominator, and store it. Store it on the cloud, store it on a different cloud, store it on your desktop, and make sure that more than one person has access to the data so that it can be found and it can be rescued. And this is from bitter experience. And obviously, and honestly, it's not that one is wishing negative on anybody at all, but I had a radiologist who was the lead doing a study for me, and everything was paper. And before we ended, it was funded by Arthritis UK, and that was what it was called then. I think they've changed their name now. Virtue Arthritis, it's called now. And my student, he died, and he was in a different city, and there's only so far you can ask the wife to find the data. And so we had to, it was very difficult to write it up and to finish. So make sure lots of people have access, lots of people know what's going on, so that the work is not wasted. Do not falsify data. There's nothing more to say about that. Just don't. Incorrect analysis is different to falsifying data. Incorrect analysis is you think you're doing it right, but you're not. You're using the wrong statistical approach, or you're grouping the data in an incorrect manner. Incorrect analysis is something that is just based off of lack of knowledge, and it's not purposefully falsifying your data. And then there are things to do with publishing. Avoid plagiarizing, of course. Don't falsify authorship. You can go on to ICMJE, where you've got where they tell you the criteria for authorship. And that bottom one, you've done all this work, you've got funding, you've done everything, and then you don't even try to publish. That too is actually an issue. That's also unethical, because there's information there that other people can learn from. There's information there that might benefit patients, even if it's negative data, negative results. This does not work. People need to know, because then you can stop people wasting money trying to do the same project. So now then, you've done the project, you're going to write it up for your thesis, but you want to get publications. I'm giving you my perspective as an editor. We can all look at our papers and think they're fabulous, but somebody else will look at it and think it's somewhat less than fabulous. So whatever you make out something to be, unfortunately, you are to a large extent, under the affected by the opinion of the editor and the editorial team. Sometimes they misunderstand your paper, but that is on you, because editors and editor and the whole editorial team are actually experienced. And if more than one person doesn't understand, then it's got to be something about how that paper was written. And that's what the sort of things we're going to look at. So I don't know if any of you understand the publication cycle, but when you submit your paper, what do you think is the first thing that can happen in it going wrong in terms of it getting published? I know that we're not going to, I can't see your hands and I can't see anything, but if you just sort of think about it in your own head, what is the first thing that could go wrong? Essentially, it could not even come to me as the managing editor. It can be returned straight back to you, because a member of the publication of Springer, the publishing team, will return it to you. Your title in the abstract section or your title in the main don't match. The authors in the different sections don't match. You haven't anonymized it. There are things that are missing. They will return it to you straight off, taking off some of the pressure from me and my editorial team to make sure that all of these factors have been considered. But assuming everything is fine, it can come to me for the initial review. The managing editor gets all of the papers, and at that point, what can go wrong? I can decide I'm not even going to take this to my reviewers. Reviewers are a precious resource. So I'm not going to distribute it to my reviewers. I'm not going to distribute it to my section editors, because there's no point wasting our time to review this paper. It will get rejected. So I will immediately reject that type of paper. But on the other hand, if I think there's an opportunity, there's a chance, I'll send it out for peer review. And it usually goes to a section editor who has expertise in that particular area. For example, neuroradiology, I might send it to Amal, and she will then send it out. The section editors have got the power to override my opinion and say, actually, Amaka, from my perspective, although you sent this to me to go to peer review, I actually don't think it's worth it. And I will respect that opinion, because they are the experts in that particular field. If it's musculoskeletal, that's, we can have the debate, because I feel like I'm an expert in musculoskeletal as well. But generally, we'll listen to what my section editors are saying. And after peer review, the options are it's rejected. We may reject, but say you can resubmit this exact same manuscript, but you have to make all of these different changes, or we can say revise it. And in the past, we used to have 4 weeks for major revision, 10 days for minor revision, not based on the number of revision, not on the number of corrections, but on the complexity of those corrections. So if you have to reanalyze data, and that's the only comment, data reanalysis can take a long time, particularly if we say go and do intra-observer reliability. It means the observers have got to go and read again the images, and so we would give you 4 weeks. Whereas if it's things like the grammar and the spelling, you can do that in 10 days, even if there's a long list of them, 30 things to do, 50 things to do in terms of the grammar. We're moving away from that to a large extent. So now what we usually will say is just revision. We don't categorize it into major or minor, and we usually give 14 days, but you may request a longer time if you feel that you need to. Very occasionally, we will reject even after revision. And usually that will be authors who make no attempt at all to meet the requirements of the reviewers and editors based on the comments that they received, or sometimes it doesn't seem as if they're not able to meet them. They have initially said there was consent, but in fact there was no consent, that sort of thing. And so then these manuscripts will be rejected. But usually after 1 or 2 or 3 revision iterations, the manuscript will get accepted. And that's a good thing. That's what we're aiming for ultimately, to have a manuscript accepted. So those that are rejected without peer review, out of scope. I think that, so if we have a pediatric, the journal is Pediatric Radiology, out of scope might be related to age. And here we have some of the feedback that I've previously given, where it's maybe give it to an ENT journal, maybe to put it to a dental journal, but not a pediatric radiology journal. So how will you know? I mean, the best thing is to look at recent publications in the journal and see the sorts of things that have been accepted and published, rather than just submitting the article. And sometimes we get things that you can, this sort of thing. I'm doing this work 2 hours. I wake up early in the morning, 2 hours in between sort of 6 and 8, for example, to get this done before my day starts. So how is somebody submitting this to a pediatric radiology journal? You sometimes just want to bash your head and just say, you know what, I just give up. Because you need to look at the journal beforehand and understand that there's no way that this whole abstract, I don't even understand it. There's no way it's relevant to a pediatric radiology journal, out of scope. And so, as I say, consider the journal even before you start to write the manuscript, because there'll be guidelines, there'll be things that will tell you the word limits and how the sections should be ordered. And it will save you much time, and it will save the reviewers much time, and it will much more likely lead to your manuscript being accepted. Wrong age group, particularly pediatrics. We define pediatrics as 17. So the minute the patient has hit their 18th birthday, they are no longer pediatric. And if you want to know why, we've summarized it in this. But essentially, imagine you're trying to do a systematic review and you're interested in pediatrics, and the paper has children and adults. Some are 19, some are 23, some are 6, some are 5. And they haven't actually extracted the data for you separately into children and adults. That paper has to be rejected from the systematic review, because if we lump them all together, the results may not be the same. And so it's really helpful for everybody if we want to compare papers, compare data, if we're rigid and strict about the age. And it's 17 years, 364 days. The minute they're 18, they are adult. We will sometimes accept the papers where there's an adult, if it's a follow-up type of study, but they have to analyze the data in the 2 groups separately, so that paper is still eligible to be included in a systematic review on the topic. Lack of novelty, all of these people sitting in a blue box, all looking the same, one more added to the box, nothing. We don't really need to know. There has to be some reason why your paper, why your manuscript, why your work needs to be done so that we can accept it. Here was one. You try and be polite. I truly appreciate the effort that has gone into your manuscript, but the biggest challenge is convincing the reader that you've added anything new to the literature. So as I said at the beginning, read the literature, revise literature, understand where your question is new. And if it's not, find a different question, because really and truly, you won't get it published. And if that's one of your goals, then you're wasting your time in that regard. And here was something where I've said, I've already invited an article, and sometimes there's an article that's been accepted but not yet published. So then how will you know that something similar is already accepted or has been invited? What might you do? Well, what you should do is contact the editor, and people do that. I don't mind being contacted. I hear that this time last 2023 said, we've got this idea about what we want to do. What do you think? Is that a good idea? And I responded the next morning. As I say, I wake up fairly early to do this. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea, but don't imagine that just because we've said submit doesn't mean it's going to get accepted. It still has to go through the standard peer review process. But most editors don't mind being contacted and asked if you're not sure. This does not mean that every single time you want to publish, you're going to email the editor and say, hey, I'd like to publish. Is this a good idea? No, because that then gets tiresome. Have a look, and if it's something that you're really unsure of, then do ask. Unconfirmed diagnosis. When do you think that it's really important to have a confirmed diagnosis? What type of manuscript should you make sure that you have a diagnosis for? So essentially, it's going to be for case reports and case reviews. We don't accept case series. We will only really accept when it's one case, a novel case, or a rare example of something that is, that is a rare example of something that we think there's something that people will learn from. And this particular case was a case report. There was no histology to confirm the diagnosis. It was meant to be cancer. There was no longitudinal follow-up. So how did we know the type of cancer? What was the chemotherapy that was given? How long was it given for? What were the imaging appearances before and after? It was very, very shady case report. Too many questions, not really convincing. So in that instance, you cannot accept it, because what is the reader meant to gain from it? What are our readers going to learn from it? And then there's the incorrect manuscript type, trying to make what should be a case review or a pictorial review, trying to fit it into original research, where it's really not. You have to just accept that it's make this a pictorial review, bring out one case and make it a case report. And sometimes it's neither a case report, it's not a pictorial review, who knows what type it is. Again, go back to the guidelines and have a look to see where it fits. And if it doesn't fit, either you make it fit or you decide this is not publishable, because it will get rejected if the reviewer and the editors don't like it. And here's just another one. It's not acceptable as original research. Usually I try and give some kind of help towards what I think it should be. So in this example, I said you may resubmit it as a pictorial review, but then include more images describing the various MRI findings and indicating the surgical importance of identifying each of those findings. So I try and be helpful rather than just say, this is rejected. And here I'm talking about the 5. So these are those 5 things just summarized, out of scope. So remember, if it's a pediatric radiology journal, then it should be pediatric radiology. Wrong age group, lack of novelty, unconfirmed diagnosis in case reports or lack of follow-up, and incorrect manuscript type. And I found this paper that was published in 2022, where they listed their top 10. And you can see that 4 of the top 5 are 5 as well for my journal, for what we most likely reject for. So very similar, really, and those are in blue. These in red are things that we would also reject the paper for, but not very commonly have I had to do it. I think one for ethical issues and maybe one or two for plagiarism. You have the Authenticate software tool that tells you the similarity score between things that are already published. If it's been a conference presentation or if it's one of these pre-publication websites, then that's fine. It doesn't count as plagiarism, and we will go take it through review. Items 6, 8, and 9, for which this journal was rejecting papers, we really don't. Pediatric radiology, and it depends on the journal. If data availability, we can ask you. Poor presentation, you can change it. Poor English, you can improve it. The only time where we may reject because of the poor English is at the very beginning, where I don't send it to the reviewers, because really the English is so poor that nobody understands what's being said. But otherwise, if it's going through the review system, we would just say to you, here are the different options you have to improve the English. There are lots of software tools. Even there's Springer Nature has its own author services, or you can just ask a friend who speaks good English or who is a native English speaker. In terms of going through peer review, and while we might reject an original article, I'm really just going to, there's lots of text here, which I'm not going to read, but it came from one original article. And I'll just, in the right-hand columns, tell you what the issues were. Poor formatting, wrong manuscript type, errors of grammar and spelling. What was the question? It wasn't very easy to identify exactly what was being asked. And the methodology was not detailed. The methodology was not clear. You want people to be able to read the methodology, understand it, and be able to replicate it themselves. Discussion did not include limitations, was not thorough enough, and the figures and tables had issues with them. Didn't fit with journal style. And here we give you a manuscript checklist in our journal, which you should use to make sure you've included everything that our journal requires and that you've used the correct formatting that we would accept. Here was another example that was very similar, except in this case, the question was very well determined. It was easy to understand what the question was, but again, formatting, grammar, and methodology were poor. And in this instance, the consent and the ethics were not clear. Bear in mind that once we raise this as a comment, when you respond back, I would generally ask to see evidence. It's just a worry in my head that it wasn't initially included, and now they're just simply saying, yes, we did. Is that because they just want it published? And a managing editor of a journal bears some responsibility in making sure that the papers are legitimate. So if you haven't initially given me consent and ethics, and you tell me afterwards that there was, I will request the research ethics approval letter for that project. Of course, somebody who is determined that they're going to lie or cheat their way to publication will send you a fake letter, but at least they've sent it, right? So that will be in our records. There's only so much that we can do. And if it comes out subsequently, we have an evidence trail that we made that attempt to prove that, that there was consent or there was ethics. Like I said at the very beginning, don't really try all of these things. One paper, it just isn't worth it. And then figures and tables, again, were not correct. I find that for our journal, the figures are often a problem. Make sure you crop them correctly. Make sure you present them correctly. So you don't want the fingers pointing downwards in a hand radiograph, for example. You want the correct side facing correctly for the axial and coronal slices, that sort of thing. And then you want to make sure you label them correctly. Don't call a T1 image as a T2 or a stir, for example. People looking can, to a large extent, tell. Make sure that everything is correct. Make sure you crop them. Make sure that no patient identifying details are present. I'm saying these things, every single thing I've said, I've seen, and I've seen this year, you know, so it's not uncommon, even though you would imagine that it would be uncommon. Case reports, ethical concerns. Don't do this business that people try and help you by giving all their data and say, take out this case and write a report on it. You can do that, but you have to do that after the main paper has been published, because you're actually biasing the results of your main paper if you begin to extract data and publish that data before you've published the overall picture. And this was something I wasn't happy about, but I sent the paper for peer review because they had, the case report was quite a nice case report, but one of the reviewers said exactly the same thing. So I thought if myself and the reviewer are both anxious, then we better not publish it. Pictorial reviews make sure that that they have the depth and the detail. If you're doing a pictorial review, the whole thing rests on the images. They've got to be beautiful, they've got to be sharp, they've got to be good quality, they've got to be well annotated. Sometimes they're too short. It's as if the person is in a hurry. They just want to put a few images there and they haven't really gone into detail. It's not done as a review. Sometimes the text is very brief. It's just as if they're doing figure legends, one figure legend after another, but there has to be more detail within that. It's a pictorial review. So write it as if it was a case series with lots of images, but also as if it was a review article, so that there's enough text to give it body. And remember that the more detail we have, the more we begin to understand what the overall picture actually is. And that's why it's important to present us with all the pieces so that we fully understand what it is your pictorial review is trying to tell us. In terms of methodology, the only thing I can say is really look at the journal guidelines. Have a look at the guidelines and know what is expected of you in the journal, from that particular journal. Sometimes we don't have guidelines. So at the time that I responded to this particular paper, we didn't have author guidelines for consensus statements. We still actually haven't added them because the BMJ has very good guidelines, and people can just look those up and it will tell you exactly what we expect to see for a guideline. We have things like the STARD, the Standards for Reporting Studies of Diagnostic Accuracy. You have the CADAS. You have so many tools that you can look at that will tell you the sections that they expect to see in terms of methodology and a good quality paper that will make your article accepted. Sometimes things are too long or there are too many images. Here was something that we just said, reduce it by around 33% at the bottom there. But now that we're completely electronic, you may be saying to yourself, does it matter now the length? Because in the past, it was the cost of printing and it was the bulk of the printed journal that was the issue. Now that it's all electronic, does it even matter? Not really, we're not as strict as we were, but there needs to be some sort of sense to it. So for example, this paper here, you can see I said, I suggest reducing your article that has 60 plus images by 33 to 50%. So 60 plus images, that's a lot, right? But the problem, if you look at the sentences above, was that there was a figure 3A, a 3B, and a 3C that generally all just looked exactly the same. There is no point showing us three sections of an axial CT scan or coronal or sagittal that show exactly the same thing. If it's the chest, maybe you want one at thoracic inlet. Maybe you want one at the hilum. Maybe you want one at the carina or at the lung base, because they're showing different things and there's a reason. But if there is no reason, don't show those image subparts. And just to show you that, that's the case, here was one that we published in 2023 with 45 images with 84 subparts. So 84 images in total. And so we will publish them, but there has to be a reason why they are shown. Don't simply put them in hoping that you will bamboozle us because you've got so many figures. There has to be a good reason. And then avoid hyperbole, this idea of, to our knowledge, no comprehensive review has ever been done before. At least they said to our knowledge. It's a nice thing to say, but they're calling their paper comprehensive. They're saying has never, that it maybe is a better way of doing it than simply just saying this is a good thing to say. Something here at the bottom of B, 2B, you can see here, they've said, a review, we performed a systematic review of all studies of the condition in pediatric radiology. I said, no, you cannot be saying you've done it of all studies. you do not know you've done it of all studies. You're quite likely to have omitted 1 or 2 studies, or 3 or 4 or 10 or 12 studies. Nobody knows. You've got to actually be careful about just saying all these exaggerating things. You could say we attempted to include all studies. And then in your limitations, you may say we may have omitted studies. There may have been studies in a different language or something, because with all the best intentions, you won't even know if you've included all of them. And although you may well be amazing, let somebody else tell you. Although your paper may be the best thing since paper public journal publication started, let someone else be the person to tell you. And then say that for yourself. Once your manuscript has gone through and people say revise it, carefully consider the editors' and reviewers' comments. You are allowed to disagree, you are allowed to rebut, but do so with respect. And to be fair, that holds true for the editors in writing their comments to you. So we can't always, now that we have a new system, and it's quite difficult to change what the editors, what the reviewers have said. We're lucky that most of our reviewers tend to be polite. I do confess that at the beginning, when I first took on the role, some months, I did offend somebody. And I realized when you write something down and you're a little bit irritated, it sounds as if you're annoyed. And if you're annoyed and you write it down, it sounds as if you're furious. So the written email always sounds worse than the situation you're in, so that you're actually feeling. They can't see you smile. They can't see you wink. They can't hear the tone of your voice. They can't see the actions that your hands are doing or your head is doing. And it just reads very cold. And, so it's hard to know. So I very much now write things in a very soft tone. And it's the same way that if an author is rebutting, be more polite than you might want to be, because even then it will still read a slightly ruder, if you understand. So, and there's no point annoying each other and disrespecting each other. I will not be a managing editor if nobody ever submits to our journal, and you will not publish if your papers are never accepted. We are in a symbiotic situation, and we should all respect each other. However, having said that, the most annoying thing is the sort of thing where people think you don't remember. I had a paper that I had rejected as a case report, and it reappeared some time later. All they had done was change the title, so I didn't recognize it as from it. But I started reading. I read everything. You read them all, and I remember. And I went and checked, and it took a while, but I found the exact same paper that had been submitted, and all they did was change the title. This sort of thing is infuriating. We all have work to do. And you can see that I said here, I have previously rejected this case report. The situation remains unchanged. Merely changing the title does not change my opinion. Please do not resubmit this case report. It will be a waste of my time and yours. I think it was justifiable to be somewhat harsh in this situation. Respect each other and don't try and get away with this sort of thing. So in summary, if I was going to advise you how to write these things, generally the English should be simple. Short sentences, avoid jargon. You may very well think that it sounds good to say, this is the domiciliary edifice erected by Jack. Maybe it is, but believe you me, everybody will prefer your paper if you simply say, this is the house that Jack built. Simple, straight to the point. Avoid abbreviations. Yes, there are some you can have. We accept things like MRI, CT, US for ultrasound, USA for United States of America, UK for United Kingdom. But when you start going on with all other different, abbreviations, it becomes very difficult to read. Some people are not sure what the abbreviation means, because sometimes there are different abbreviations depending on the topic, and it does not read well. So avoid abbreviations, spell check. Use the software tools of Word, be it the spell check, be it the squiggly green line or the squiggly blue line or the squiggly red line. If it's there for a reason. Check. Sometimes, you want to use US spelling, and you don't, and the thing is telling you that it's defaulting to UK, so it tells you it's wrong spelling. That's fine. You can ignore it if you know that's what you want, but make sure you look at all of them because it's helpful. It means that a reviewer who's on the edge about accepting or rejecting your paper, because it's so well written, will finally say, do you know what? Let's accept this paper. You put them in a good mood. Follow the journal guidelines. It's so easy. And this is especially true afterwards. The first iteration, when you're first submitting, is less of a problem because you don't even know if it will get accepted. But once it's accepted and there are the comments, and go back and make sure you follow carefully the journal guidelines. In writing a title, in choosing a title, make it succinct, but it has to cover salient facts. If you want it to be clever, that's fine. If you're thinking you want it to be witty, that's fine. But you've got to have some various things. Is it retrospective or prospective? What is the question it's answering? Is it modality specific? Is it age specific? Is it country specific? If these things are important to the question, then include them. And I would say write the abstract last. It's essentially a summary of everything. If you've written all the different sections, then it's easy for you to pull out the top 2 or 3 sentences from each section that should go into your abstract. Some journals, and we are one of them, have a visual abstract. Some call it a graphical abstract. So visual abstract or graphical abstract. And this is we have a template for original papers and a template for review papers. You don't do the graphical abstract until it's been accepted. There's no need because, you know, it won't get published if the paper is not accepted. And it's called a graphical abstract for a reason. Here in our right-hand pane, we've got lots of text. Everybody fails sometimes. The reason some people do not succeed is because rather than learning and growing from their failures, they get weighed down by them. Their failures become a burden and a handicap, preventing them from succeeding. In contrast, the successful person derives important lessons from each failure. They do not give up, but use each failure as a stepping stone on their way to success. That is not a graphical abstract. The written word is a form of communication, yes, but the point of a graphical abstract is that it should be visual. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So everything we said is depicted in this picture. The person that's weighed down by their failures, the person that's using their failure as a stepping stone to success. That's the purpose of a graphical abstract. Use the imaging. And we are a visual subspecialty in radiology. So we're lucky in that way. And then keywords, use mesh, make sure they're mesh compatible, put them in alphabetical order, always consider the disease, the modality, the age group, the methodology. That's enough. If there are other words that you want to use, you know, you can add them. But if you have those 4 key categories in your head when you're selecting your keywords, you'll cover everything. The keywords are for you. If somebody's looking up your topic, you want your paper to be identified. You don't want them to miss your paper. If there's a big systematic review that's going to be published in Lancet or in New England Journal of Medicine, how annoying if your paper wasn't included simply because you didn't have the right keywords. So that if you're wondering why do we have keywords, that's why. It's not for me, it's not for the journal, it's for you. And then the background section, what is the problem being addressed? So how I always address this and teach people is chocolate cake, okay? For somebody that has celiac disease. There are no delicious chocolate cakes available that are gluten-free. That is the background. That is the problem being addressed. And so materials and methods are the recipe for your gluten-free chocolate cake. What sort of flour are you using? What sort of milk, right? So it's not going to be wheat, because if you use wheat flour, my goodness, your gluten-free person will react. So you're going to talk about, I don't know, we're using yam flour, you know, we're going to try something with beans or corn, something that you think is gluten-free and maybe also dairy-free. They do not like milk. So we're going to use oat milk or soya milk, you know, something, almond milk, something that is dairy-free. And this is the quantity, the volume of milk, the weight of the flour, the what you're using instead of eggs, you know, the protein replacement. We're using butter or dairy-free, all of these things, and the quantities. The oven was preheated at this degrees centigrade for this length of time. This is the size of the tin we used. This is the duration of baking. This is what, so the recipe for the cake in a step-by-step process with the weights, with the times, with the temperature, so that anybody anywhere in the world can replicate your exact gluten-free, dairy-free chocolate cake. And then you do the results, tables, figures, legends. And here you describe the cake. How did it rise? How moist was it? How did it taste? How crunchy was it? That sort of thing. How nice did it look to the eyes? And you can see here, I've highlighted in blue for these two different types of cake, what might appear to be subjective critique. And I'm saying in the results, you've got to be completely objective. The results are not telling people this was much nicer. The results are not comparing. But if you're doing a qualitative aspect, if you're doing mixed methods research, you can have qualitative and quantitative. If you ask 10 people to taste your cake and 8 of the people said, this is perfect, you know, you asked them what occasions this would be perfect for, and they said all occasions, any occasion, then you can put that as a result. We asked 10 people and 8 out of them said this. We asked 50 people and 75 of them, 75% of them said that, you know, it's melts in the mouth. So you can have a qualitative aspect to your results section. And then the discussion is where you look at your results, you compare them to what is already known. Unfortunately, our cake did not rise as much as Offiah's did. You know, unfortunately, our cake gave people more stomach upset than the cake by Smith et al. Or actually, you know, what we realized is we did not bake it for long enough, or we used too high a temperature, or the soya milk just did not work, whatever it is. And then the conclusion is that in future studies need to use a more generous amount of milk, or future studies need to use less chocolate or more chocolate, or less sugar or more sugar. You critique your cake. You personally now are critiquing it based on how your results compared to other people's. And if you keep it in that way, you won't go wrong, and you understand what each section of the paper is meant to be about, so that your materials and methods are how you recruited your patients, what you did to them, when you did it to them, how you did it to them. Don't talk about any other papers, except if you want to say we analyzed according to, you know, Cohen's kappa, or we recruited based on the method, something like that. Then your results are what the MRIs showed, the size of the tumor, how it regressed, what it was like on T1 or T2, how CT compared to the inter-observer reliability, the intra-observer reliability, that sort of thing. And then your discussion is how you say, we had much better inter-observer reliability because the T1 and the T2, that sort of thing. Or we use this different measurement technique, or our data was worse. And what we should have done was, you know, given contrast. So that is how the sections should be for your write-up. And then finally, there are the statements. These are easy. They're just there. It's in the author guidelines. Conflicts of interest, you've got to state those. Author contributions. And this is, a lot of people now want that, because being an author is not just simply because you reviewed the paper at the very end. You have to have been involved in several aspects of the study. And is the data available? Many journals now will want that data to be available. If the raw data, if somebody wants it. And so you have to be able to have that. References, there are all different styles of writing references for different journals. Make sure that you're using the reference style of that particular journal. With software tools now, most of the ref manager type softwares, you can just select the journal and it will automatically make your references into the format that fits. And then there are the author guidelines, which I've said before. And as I said, if you're not sure, contact the editor. I don't mind being contacted. And, you know, bear in mind that, as I said, it's a symbiotic relationship. We're all trying to help each other. You, the authors, are the most important people in the center, helped by reviewers, helped by the editors, with the final outcome, we hope, being that, you get your manuscript accepted and published in our journal. So one last word, completely unrelated to this, is that I'm running to be RCR president. From February 3rd to 23rd this year, the voting opens. Please vote for me. Thank you. I think we have the 5 or 10 minutes I was asked to leave for questions. I need to stop sharing.
Thank you, Professor Amaka. It was such a delightful presentation, and I'm sure it was very helpful for our audience. And I really loved the chocolate cake analogy. Made me think about baking, but you have a couple of questions. The first one is from Samuel. He says, thank you so much, Dr. Offiah. This is very informative. My question is, when we say we need to give access to our data to someone so that we will have access to the files, wouldn't it be breaching the privacy and confidentiality?
No. So what you have to give them is the raw data. There mustn't be any patient identifiable details. You can have age, you can have sex or gender if it's gender related, and then the results of the data. But there shouldn't be hospital numbers, there shouldn't be NHS numbers, there shouldn't be addresses or names. It's just the data. You have to make sure of that, because if you give identifiable data, then yes, you're breaching.
Okay, thank you. You have another question. When writing results and discussion, do I have to align to research question or to the gap?
Well, the research question is the gap. You identify the gap, and the gap is the research question. So you have to align it to both. It will automatically align, and because you keep the question in the forefront of everything you're saying. If you did it the way I said with the cake, there is no gluten-free cake, and then you discuss why your gluten-free cake is working or not working, right? So you have to. If you're not, then if you're not, it's very difficult for anybody to understand the purpose of your paper. And in fact, by the time you've written your background, it should be very clear what question you're asking. And then it should be very clear why you've used the method that you've used. And then your results, and then you analyze how have my data answered the question that I've asked at the beginning.
Thank you. You have one interesting question by Brian. I don't know if he wants to ask you directly. If not, I can read the question. Nice presentation, Prof. What is your take on AI-powered paper reviews?
Well, I actually wrote a little article, an editorial last year about this AI. I think you've got to be very careful. I think that at the moment, AI is very much an assistant. So you can put your paper in, and you can ask it to review. If you check my name and you say AI and pediatric radiology, I think it was last year, might be 20, you'll see it did quite a good review. But that was for a letter. I think that you've got to be careful that what it's saying to you about the paper is actually true. So you can ask it, and you can type in if critique a paper for me, or you can copy and paste the exact paper and say critique this for me, but you have to now read what has come out. And it may give you ideas of what to look for. It may give you ideas of whether it's good or bad, but in the end, you as the expert reviewer have got to make your final conclusion, because if you don't, you're going to find that review is going to be the same for the next 30 papers, generally speaking. And sometimes what it comes out with is complete nonsense. It reads well, and it sounds sensible even to the system, but it's rubbish. So you have to be very careful. We had a paper submitted by someone who wanted the AI to be a co-author. AI is not a co-author. Authors are responsible for proving the scientific integrity of the paper, and AI cannot do that. But if you're submitting a paper that you've used AI to help you write, you now have to say so in a statement.
There are a flood of questions coming in. One is, how important are the limitations to the study? Must they be at discussion section or at the introduction?
The limitations should be at the end. They're always the last bit of the discussion. Don't put it as a heading. I see lots of people want a heading that says limitations. Just put it just end with saying there are limitations to this study. Almost every single study has some limitation, and all the time I've never rejected a paper just because it had no limitations, but I will always say add some limitations. It's to make you think. It's to make the next set of people who are doing the study or a similar study see what should be done next. Unless it's a review article, there's no original paper that doesn't have limitations.
Absolutely. Another question is, do you think it's effective when authors state that readers should request their data sets if needed? Often those authors fail to respond to follow-up emails. I think it's regarding data set and requesting it, and then authors not responding to those emails, which is...
I mean, they should respond because that's the whole point, isn't it? I've had them where they've responded but said they don't have the data, or they no longer have the data, or and some of these you've tried. There's nothing. I don't think we're at a point yet where it's not for the editors to now go back to the authors and make them provide the data. If they have been funded and you really, really want this raw data, it's often a condition of the funding that the raw data is made available if requested. So if they've been funded, you could resort to writing to the funders to say, I've requested this raw data and I haven't received it. They may not be able to get the raw data, but they can certainly not give more funding in future if that's what they want to do.
I have a very interesting question, which is quite common from, I think, papers coming out of Africa. And that question is adding words like resource limited, mention developing countries or city name in the title, will it make the paper more interesting or less interesting to reviewers, especially for reviewers from the US?
If I'm going to be perfectly honest, I think you're better off not. I think it introduces a bias that shouldn't be there. It's sometimes better if you have to just to say LMIC than the specific country. We're more and more becoming less and less prejudiced, and Amma will tell you that I've completely revamped our editorial board. So our editorial board and section editors, there's no way that we're going to be prejudiced against any papers just because of the title. But I can only speak for pediatric radiology. We have section editors from every non-American continent, and males, females, different topics, different. I mean, when you look at our photographs, I just love it so much. So we're okay. But I would say that when I first started and I just had it myself, and these people that were Caucasian, and you just don't know, I would actually write back and say to people to remove it. It prejudices, and it actually does, even when you don't want it to.
Absolutely. I think most people who are sending their manuscripts from Ethiopia have had that as an issue. So I think it's a very good feedback for those interested in publishing in high-end journals.
I do think
2 last questions.
I do think that since I do think in the 3.5 years since I've been doing it, that because how we've changed the section editors, because I've been in place, and then gradually we've got people from Nigeria, we've got Ethiopia, we've got Eastern Bloc, we've got Asia. I'm seeing more and more papers coming through. What I want to set up with Nazreen Ahmed in South Africa, have I said, is that her surname? Nazreen Mohammed, I think it is, in South Africa. What I want to set up with her is reviewers in South Africa who will review the papers before they come to us. So it's a different stage, because once it's come to us and it goes out to our reviewers, they are more like, and they say reject, it's very difficult for us to do anything about it. But if we have a level beforehand that looks at the papers, gets them up to a higher standard, without meaning to disrespect anybody, but gets them up to a higher standard, and then they come to us, then we're more likely to accept. And so that's what we're looking into setting up with her.
We have one question regarding the cost of publishing in the journal. Maybe you can give a short answer regarding that. And the last question is, does AI paraphrasing encouraged when developing a manuscript? It's a similar question as earlier.
This one. So Springer has different agreements and things, and Springer tries to bring the costs down for LMIC countries. That's the best thing I can say. Otherwise, you just don't publish it open access. If you don't publish it open access, then it's free. You just have to make sure you tick the correct box in the publishing thing. If you have a co-author, usually it has to be either the first author or the senior author, the corresponding author, actually, to be precise. If the corresponding author belongs to an institution that has an agreement with Springer, then it can be published free open access. So if Brian is the first author on a paper and I am the senior author on that paper, University of Sheffield has this agreement in place. If I become the corresponding author rather than Brian, then that paper will be published free of charge. Corresponding author has no real major, respect to it. The corresponding author is the person at the email. And it has to do all the work and answer all those difficult questions. So if I was the corresponding author, they keep emailing me. I can assure you, Brian, you're going to get them all forwarded to you to do the work, to answer the questions, but the paper would be published free of charge in our journal, because University of Sheffield has the has an arrangement. And then the last question was, yeah, you can use AI to correct the English. It's the same as using, we actually, if you read the text that I showed you about improving the English, I was talking about the Springer. Springer has this author service resource, or I said you could get a native English speaker or a friend. And I also said there was one of the things there that are AI tools. Yeah, they can correct your English if you want, but if you're writing with AI, you have to say so. It won't be
off topic. For people who want to vote for you, they want to know where to do it. So if we can drop them
so in terms of that, you have to be an RCR member and you have to be in the United Kingdom. So it may be that you don't qualify, but you will have friends who are RCR members in the United Kingdom. And if that is the case, they will all receive an email when the voting opens on February the 3rd. So your job is to highlight and say to them, make sure you vote.
Best of luck. It was an absolute pleasure to have you. I think we have one person who wants to directly ask you a question. So Juhi, do you want to unmute this person, or so this will be the last one.
I'm very grateful for all these questions. It's always nice when people ask questions. Thank you.
I think we had already gone over the question. It was related to AI. It was by Ola. So I think he'd already asked that question. But thank you so much, Prof. We really appreciated your talk and learned so much.
Can you send me a copy of the chat?
Of course, I will save it.
Thank you very much. It acts as evidence that it happened.
It was an absolute pleasure
Thanks,
having you with us. And I think
so
everybody has learned quite a lot from this session, because I think people in academia particularly want to publish in high-end journals, and it's quite helpful to have this guidance. And we truly appreciate Camera as well as the organizing team and Professor Amaka for being here with us today. So thank you very much.
And thank you for the invitation and for the wonderful questions and interaction. I enjoyed it myself too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.